wasn't the picture. It was me. I did post it, and I thought it was me as the doctor, and had to do with Red Cross.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Behavioral Arts. My name is Spidey, and I use my degree in sociology and psychology, my certifications in criminal interrogation and body language analysis, and my experience as an award-winning mentalist to teach people behavioral analysis and practical psychology on stages and television shows all over the world. This week's analysis is going to be a doozy. So just last week on April 12th, which coincides with Orthodox Easter Sunday, President Donald Trump posted an AI-modified photo of himself bearing striking resemblances to Jesus. He was wearing a white and red robe, there was light coming out of his hands, he appeared to be healing a man who was sick, and he was surrounded by a nurse, military personnel, and a woman who was praying. The backlash to this post was instant and massive, so shortly after, the post came down. And just a few days after that, he was asked about it by a reporter on the grounds of the White House, and his answer was behaviorally remarkable. There were many elements to his response that deviated enormously from the way he normally responds to questions like this, and even if we compare it to another question he was asked moments later about his post about Pope Leo, they are two completely different sets of behavior. But what do these differences suggest, and what do his body language, facial expressions, and word choice reveal? Let's dive right in.
Mr. President, did you post that picture of yourself depicted as Jesus Christ?
Well, it wasn't the picture. It was me. I did post it, and I thought it was me as the doctor, and had to do with Red Cross as a Red Cross worker there, which we support. And only the fake news could come up with that one. So I just heard about it, and I said, how did they come up with that?
Okay, there is a lot going on here and a lot of things that deviate from Donald Trump's idiosyncratic gestures, which means the behaviors that a person does very regularly in any context. Baseline means in this interaction, idiosyncratic means in all interactions. So right in the beginning, you'll notice, and this goes on throughout, that his body's swaying left to right quite a bit. And for the longest time, I would have told you that this is not idiosyncratic for Donald Trump because he stands still when he speaks and he's very animated with his hands, but not his body. However, in some recent clips, we have seen a bit of this swaying back and forth. So is this a result of stress, impatience? Is it his age starting to show in his behaviors? Well, a swaying could be any one of those things, but in this particular case, I don't believe that it has anything to do with this question or this topic because he was swaying before the question was even asked. And he's going to keep doing it throughout this interaction, regardless of the topic. Now, what's really important here is the question that's being asked. In interrogation and interview rooms, whenever we ask a question, we really give a lot of attention to, is this response answering my question, and what is the person's focus? What's important to them? Now, the question was cut off, but at the point where it's cut off, what we got so far is, did you post that picture of yourself depicted as Jesus Christ? Now, maybe she was going somewhere else with that. She was going to ask about the meaning of it or why he did that. But up until this point, it's, did you post that picture? And he cuts her off, and the first thing that comes out of his mouth is a correction. He corrects the record. Correcting the record is a really fascinating principle that's often used in interrogation, negotiation, and it relates to the fact that it's almost a basic human need that if we see something that we know is incorrect, we can't help ourselves from correcting it. I've also been seeing this more and more all over social media recently, where there'll be a post of like actors with their names under them, but one of them has the wrong name on purpose. Or maybe like the cast of Friends or something like that, where one of the actors is completely replaced by someone who has no business being there. And the reason they do this is because they know that most people can't resist the urge of correcting that. So that's the first thing President Trump goes to here. Before he addresses whether or not he posted it, he says that wasn't the picture or depiction. I'm not sure what he's saying there. He kind of mumbles it. And at the same time as he's saying that, we see a no gesture with a slow blink. Now, closing the eyes for longer than a blink in a conversation has been highly researched, and it was found that even children who were born blind do this, which is very important data because it means it's not an observed behavior, and it also means we don't do it to block out visual stimulus because they wouldn't need to do that. So it's a human instinct to close the eyes conversationally. And we do this when we're trying to keep a thought in or keep a thought out. So in this cluster, with this no gesture, with the eyes closed, it's often that second one. I don't want to face this idea, get it out of your head, I don't want to deal with it. No, that's not what this is. So after this beginning of a sentence, which he doesn't really complete, he kind of fumbles on his words a little bit there, he brings in another sentence, which is, I did post it. And as he's saying that, we see a number of things. First, throughout this entire beginning of the response, he's looking down quite a bit. A lot more than he normally does. So typically when he's answering a question, he has these quick darts down here to the right. This is idiosyncratic for him, and it's how he thinks about the response, and he comes up and he answers, and he thinks and he answers. In this response, it's held down there for quite a bit. So this downwards gaze can be because this requires a lot more thought to think about this answer, because it's really rocky waters what he's about to present. But also at the same time, it can have something to do with shame or embarrassment, because very often with negative emotions like that, we go downwards. Everything, not just the eyes. We slump down. It's even in the language. I'm feeling down. I'm down in the dumps. So downwards is often this kind of negative feeling. Now here's a quick little note about behavioral analysis, because I know that for some people already, we're jumping to massive conclusions based on what we want to see here. Behavioral analysis has nothing to do with what we want to see. We look at the clusters of behavior, put them all together, compare to other answers to try to form a conclusion. So the fact that he has to think a lot about this, does that immediately mean this is deception or honesty? No, that would be confirmation bias. We have to look at what else is going on and put it all together. So here, as he's really thinking about this, maybe feeling a little bit of that embarrassment, he fumbles on his words a little bit. I did post it. And at that very moment, as he says, I did post it, we get a very big, clear eyebrow flash, which is one of the body parts that I pay the most attention to. Research has shown again and again that the eyebrows are extremely important to human communication because we could see them from very far away. So that eyebrow flash, when the eyebrows go up mid-conversation, is very consistent with moments of emphasis, social connection or greeting, and surprise. Basically, the eyebrows let us know what's important. It's like the exclamation point of the face. So in this case, he's putting a lot of importance on I did post it. Like it was me, I posted this. And that's very important. And we're going to circle back to why that is. Now his body language throughout the rest of that clip is going to be pretty consistent. A lot of that downwards gaze, but pay attention to his words. I thought it was me as a doctor. That's all in the past. I thought it was me as a doctor, thus implying that he no longer believes that. Because we all know Donald Trump. Whether you've watched hours of him or just a few moments, we know that when he firmly believes something, he speaks in the present. If he really believed, even now, that it was him as a doctor, he would say, that's me as a doctor. I don't know why people are making a big deal. I don't know why the news is making a big deal. That's a picture of me as a doctor. He's not. He's saying, I thought it was me as a doctor. Then he says, and that it had to do with Red Cross, because there's a Red Cross worker in there, and I'm not really sure who he's referencing, because there's a nurse in there, but I'm not seeing anyone in a Red Cross uniform. So I'm not sure what he meant there, but he throws in, which we support. We support Red Cross.
I thought it was me as the doctor, and had to do with Red Cross as a Red Cross worker there, which we support.
And this is called a resume statement, and it's something that Donald Trump does a lot. Resume statements, or convincing statements, are statements that we make to build our character, build ourselves up. So very often Donald Trump will inject into speeches or conversations the good things that he supported or the good things that he's done, even if it doesn't always necessarily relate to what's being talked about. Very often this is a way that if we're, under the microscope or feeling a little insecure, we throw in these statements to say, look, here's the good thing that I'm doing. Like I support the Red Cross, right? So it's not all bad. Then he continues the sentence and says, and only the fake news could come up with something like that. Now I'd love to know if he's tying this to the beginning of the sentence, right? I thought, blah, 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 that only the fake news could come up with something like that. Because I want to know, does he mean in the past? Like he thought that only the fake news could come up, or now in this moment, does he still think that only the fake news can come up with that? And we kind of get our answer in the very next sentence, because he says, I had heard about it, and I said, how did they come up with that? As we get this confusion look on his face. So he's talking about it in the past. Usually when he's adamant about something, it's in this moment that he's wondering now. Only the fake news can make up a story like this. I wonder how they came up with this one, but I wonder now, not I wondered, not I said. So the implication there, he's not saying it, but this is what is implied, is that at first, when he first saw it, he thought he was a doctor in a red and white robe, not a lab coat, who has light coming out of his hands. That's what he thought, he was a doctor. And when he saw the news saying he was Jesus, his initial reaction was that only they could come up with this. How did they come up with this one? Where do they see Jesus in this picture, which is clearly a picture of him as a doctor? So we're going to keep looking at the behaviors to see what story they tell together. But so far, what I find really interesting is something that not a lot of people are talking about, because a lot of the headlines are talking about how it's hard to believe that he looked at that picture and thought he was a doctor. And as much as that is hard to believe, for me, it's harder to believe even more that once the media came out and said, that's a picture of him as Jesus, that he didn't go, oh yeah, oh my God, I guess it is Jesus. I totally missed that. Because what he's implying here is that when the media came out and said, this is a picture of him as Jesus, he looked at it and said, oh, come on, how do they come up with this stuff? This is clearly me as a doctor. So even with that information, even having heard that, he went back to it and still didn't see it. In a moment, we're gonna look at a couple of clips that really support why I find that part harder to believe. But before we do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button, turn those notifications on, and take a quick second to like this video because it really does help with the success of the channel.
It's supposed to be me as a doctor, making people better. And I do make people better. I make people a lot better. As an example, the 11,000, I understand your husband's going through treatment.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
He's
He
going
has
through some
cancer.
very serious cancer treatment, so
Yes, sir.
this goes a long way.
Yes, sir. It sure does.
So in this second part of the answer, his confidence has shifted quite a little bit. So we're no longer stuck down here with that lower tonality. We're now up here again, a lot of facing the reporter, quick darts down here, but even the confidence in the way that he's speaking. I do make people better. I make them a lot better. And he's emphasizing with his head in the way that he normally does when he's very convinced of something. And then he does another thing that is very typical for Donald Trump, which is social proof. Very often in his speeches, he talks about his friends who told him this and all the people who say this about him to kind of bring himself up with those resume statements. In this case, he's turning to the lady to his right, and she goes by DoorDash Grandma, and her husband is going through a very serious and expensive treatment. And this whole event with Donald Trump was to celebrate the one-year anniversary of a policy put in place in America where employees don't have to pay taxes on tips for a certain amount of income, but she certainly qualifies. And here's what he's doing. He's turning his attention to her and he's redirecting the attention. Like, it's not about the picture, it's about the fact that I do help people. And here's an example of one, because the policy that I put in place is helping this woman pay for the treatment of her husband. And that's undeniably a great thing for this woman. I'm super happy for her. The fact that she gets to hold on to all her tips and use some of that to pay for her husband's treatment, that's awesome. But it doesn't have a whole lot to do with this conversation, right? It's a very convenient misdirect to say, I do make people better, and here's an example of that. See, so many people are focused on this whole, there's no way he thought that he was a doctor, that not a lot of people are talking about the fact that even that doesn't make sense. Like, you're not a doctor. You're a policymaker, and some of those policies are helping Americans, and that's really, really great, and there's a great example of that right here. But that doesn't make him a doctor. And my favorite part of that whole thing is that the DoorDash delivery, this big thing that's happening, was from McDonald's, which is of course what all the doctors eat. Okay, next I want you to look at this question he was asked in this exact same conversation, this time about Pope Leo, because he had this social media back and forth with Pope Leo where they each had some opinions to share about one another. And here he's being asked about whether or not he's going to apologize or take that back. Look at his response here.
He now says you owe Pope Leo an apology. Will you apologize?
No, I don't, because Pope Leo said things that are wrong. He was very much against what I'm doing with regard to Iran, and you cannot have a nuclear Iran. Pope Leo would not be happy with the end result, so I can't. I think he's very weak on crime and other things, so I'm not. I mean, he went public. I'm just responding to Pope Leo. And his brother is a big MAGA person, and he's a great guy, Louis. And I said I like Louis better than I like the Pope. No, you have to have law and order in our country, and that's what we have now. We have the lowest crime numbers we've had in a long time. We've done a great job on crime. So we have the lowest murder rate in 125 years, since 1900. The lowest murder rate. So
right in the beginning, when he's shutting down the idea of apologizing to Pope Leo, we see something that is instantly recognizable universally. Immediately, he puffs up and his chin goes upwards as he says, "No, I don't," immediately and very confidently. There has been a lot of research done universally on the nonverbal communication of pride, and it's very recognizable all over the world. Across cultures, even cultures that are quite detached from mainstream society, pride looks very similar. And it's very often associated with the chin going up, the chest opening up, the arms coming out in what we call arms akimbo, like this, and basically taking up a lot of space. In fact, this is one of the things that I call out the most confidently on stage when I'm reading people in front of an audience for entertainment. So mentalists use a combination of trickery and psychology to make it seem like we know what someone's thinking for entertainment purposes only. So we know memories from their lives and details of those memories, or we know the passcode to their phone. And when I'm doing a reading on stage in front of an audience and I see that kind of upwards chin up, I almost always will call out that the person is thinking of a memory associated to pride. Okay, something almost unmistakable happened there. The shoulders went up, big deep of breath, and you went upwards. This is a feeling of pride. And you never said that to anyone. So in this response about Pope Leo, we get this pride right in the beginning, "No, I don't," very confidently. Then he continues to speak very clearly. There's no stumbling. He's not in that lower tonality that he was before. There are a few quick darts down here, but he brings it right back up here and there's a lot of confidence. You'll even notice with the chin that he's going forward a lot to emphasize a lot of these points. He's very adamant about this. There's another really, really great moment, a little cluster where he says, "I think he's very weak on crime." And we get that eyebrow flash, weak on crime, doubling down, because in his post, weak is the word he used. So he's re-emphasizing that. So again, remember how I said this is the exclamation point of the face? Well, in his post, he put weak in all caps. So we're literally seeing the physical version of that word, weak. And as he says it, weak on crime, again, he perks up. This is confidence. He's very confident about this opinion and he's doubling down on it. And then he does something very typical, which he did before, and he does in a lot of his speeches, where he went to social proof. So he talks about the Pope's brother, who's a supporter of MAGA. And then he talks about how the crime rate is really low, lower than it's been for a very long time. So again, it's that classic redirect to social proof and those resume statements. So here we have an example of something that he's denying with full confidence that's very much in line with the way he normally tackles questions. That's a little bit different from the answers that he gave regarding the healer or Jesus post. But there are a few things that are really important and are going to give me a lot of context when it comes to the denial of the Jesus post. First of all, this is important. In the history of Donald Trump being on social media, there have been countless posts that he's made that got a lot of backlash on social media and in the media. And he does not very often remove those posts. He very often doubles down. He stands by, like he did here with Pope Leo. He stands by them. He doesn't really care what the rhetoric is out there. He just doubles down and confidently just states his opinion. That having been said, there were a few posts that were removed. And as far as I know, I could be forgetting one, or maybe there's one or two that I don't know about, but as far as I know, every single time that happened, he did not say that he was the one who posted it. He suggested or flat out said that a social media staffer posted it and that they missed it, or that the staff didn't hear such and such thing, or they didn't see that element in there that caused the response. So examples come to mind with just recently something involving Barack and Michelle Obama that was taken down, and the official position was that it was someone on staff who put it up and missed that that was at the end of the video. There was something similar with Hillary Clinton that was taken down. A while ago, there was a retweet where someone in the audience yelled out something really offensive, and that was taken down. And their position was a little unclear on that, but the statement was that the president didn't hear it. Whether that means somebody else posted it or he saw the video but didn't hear that offensive statement, not sure, but it wasn't like this, where he goes, "I posted that." So this is the first time, personally ever, I've seen him say, no, I did post it because I thought this, and presumably because he took it down and didn't double down on the whole doctor thing, he now sees that, of course, this is not a doctor. There's something else that's very important for context, and I want to be very respectful here because I don't like to assume what people's faith or lack of faith is, because faith or lack of faith is a very personal thing and everyone can express it however they want. But behaviorally speaking, there are a lot of clips and a lot of instances throughout history that would indicate that Donald Trump is not extremely religious. Behaviorally speaking, and based on a few clips that we're going to talk about, I think he's somewhere in the light Christian to agnostic area, because he does say things like God bless America. He talks about how the Bible is important. He does identify as a Christian, and I think that a lot of that is because he knows that his following is Christian, so he leans towards that. But there are a couple of instances throughout history that would put into question just how intensely Christian he is. So one example that made headlines all over the place when it happened about 10 years ago, when in an interview he was asked some questions about his favorite parts of the Bible, and this happened.
Okay. You mentioned the Bible. You've been talking about how it's your favorite book, and you said, I think last night in Iowa, some people are surprised that you say that. I'm wondering what one or two of your most favored Bible verses are and why.
I wouldn't want to get into it, because to me that's very personal. You know, when I talk about the Bible, it's very personal, so I don't want to get into verses. I don't want to get into...
There's no verse that means a lot to you that you think about or cite?
The Bible means a lot to me, but I don't want to get into specifics.
Even to cite a verse that
you
like?
No, I don't want to do that.
You're an Old Testament guy or a New Testament guy?
Probably equal. I think it's just an incredible... The whole Bible is an incredible... I joke very much so. They always hold up the Art of the Deal. I say my second favorite book of all time. But I just think the Bible is just something very special.
I think it's pretty clear that what we're seeing there is a discomfort with the topic and a lack of familiarity. Not necessarily someone who doesn't want to talk about it because it's personal. Because they're asking for a favorite passage. And how hard is it to say, you know, I don't really have a favorite passage, but I really like the Romans because it has a lot of great lessons. Or just, you know, reference a part of it. Or when they ask about Old Testament versus New Testament, you know, how hard is it to say, well, here's what I like about the Old Testament, here's what I like about the New Testament, as opposed to saying, you know, they're both great, which I think indicates that he's not really sure what goes where or what's what. And then this is even more emphasized by the fact that he redirects at the end with this little line about how when they talk about his own book, he says, my second favorite book, because that's all he's got in this moment. Another really big story along these lines was shortly after this interview in 2016, when he was giving a speech at Liberty University, which is a Christian university, and this speech became famous as the 2 Corinthians speech. Take a look.
Because I hear this is a major theme right here, but 2 Corinthians, right? 2 Corinthians 3:17, that's the whole ball game. Where the Spirit of the Lord, right? Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And here there is Liberty College, but Liberty University, but it is so true. You know, when you think, and that's really, is that the one? Is that the one you like? I think that's the one you like, because I loved it. And it's so representative of what's taken place.
So for those who don't know, which by the way, it's totally okay to not know. It's even okay if he doesn't know. I'm just saying that these moments give us an indication of how familiar he is with the Bible, because it's not 2 Corinthians, it's 2 Corinthians. And what had happened there is that he didn't write that speech. That's why he keeps looking down. The man who wrote the speech, Tony Perkins, is much more familiar with the Bible and that crowd. So he wrote the speech for Donald Trump, and he wrote 2. The number 2 Corinthians, because in his head, because he's read the Bible and he's familiar with it, he just assumed that everyone knows that that's 2 Corinthians. It didn't dawn on him that someone who's not as familiar with it would see that and read it as 2 Corinthians. So we see it there as Donald Trump is reading it. He says 2 Corinthians, and we hear a reaction in the crowd. There's a bit of muttering, a bit of laughter. There's this bit of an audible reaction. And here's the thing. He knows that. You see, when you're on stage, very often, you know what the audience's reaction is. And you know what you're expecting, and you know when you don't get it. So he was expecting there, when he said a quote that he thought would resonate, he was expecting excitement and a response, which is why we hear him go on and say, right, that's something that you guys like. He's trying to get that response that he's not sure why he didn't get. It's because he misquoted it and he's not aware of that. And again, very important, there's nothing wrong with not knowing that. Everyone's free to know or not know whatever they want. That's not the point. The point is, when you're in an interview saying that the Bible is your favorite book, but you really can't hold a conversation about it, and then shortly after you're on a stage giving a speech and you say 2 Corinthians instead of 2 Corinthians, there's a disconnect. The two don't go together. That would be like if I was talking about my favorite books and I said that they were written by Chassé Hugues and Scott Rousset. That would be like if I told you my favorite books were written by That would be like if I told you my favorite books were written by Scott Rousset. That would be like if I told you my That would be like if I told you my favorite books were written by Scott Teruse and Chasse Hugues. Okay, in all seriousness, the reason that I brought this up is not because I want to pinpoint exactly what his level of faith is. That's a personal thing, but it's because it relates to the conversation here. Because although he said that he's a Christian, there's some evidence that he's not that familiar with the vernacular, and there is a history of posts that he's made that a lot of Christians felt was tone deaf. That's not objective, that's debated, but there has been a lot of cases where things like that happened. And the reason this is very important is because it relates to something called the availability heuristic, which is a huge part of how magicians and mentalists create the tricks that deceive us for entertainment. So availability heuristic basically means that our mind goes to the things that are the most available and the most familiar, not the things that are objectively the most true. So as a really practical example, let's suppose that I have a trip planned to Texas, which is pretty far for me, so I've booked a flight. And I go on social media and I see a video of a plane accident. So I go, oh my God, I'm not getting on a plane. I don't want that to happen to me. I'm going to drive to Texas instead. That's called the availability heuristic. My mind is making an assumption because of availability, because I saw that video. It's ignoring the fact that statistically, I'm way more likely to get into a car accident because they happen way more frequently, especially on a long drive like that, than a plane accident. And it's the same with magicians and mentalists as well, right? This is why magic tricks work, because we come out with something that looks totally ordinary, like a deck of cards. And immediately your mind goes to availability. It goes, yeah, I know a deck of cards. There are 52 different cards. Some are red, some are black, all different. And you don't suspect for one moment that this is not a regular deck of cards. In fact, it's not a deck at all. These are just completely blank cards. And we can manipulate the things that you see, the things that you perceive, because we rely on that availability of you thinking you're familiar with it. So why am I talking about the availability heuristic in this case? Well, we see how it applies to the 2 Corinthians speech, right? Because the person who wrote it down is so familiar with it, he just assumes that this, like the number 2 Corinthians, anybody would read that as 2 Corinthians because that's what's available to him. Whereas for Donald Trump, what's available to him is that this means 2. So if we apply that to the whole Jesus post, it's possible. It's possible that those who are very familiar with Jesus immediately look at that and go, yeah, that's Jesus. He's got the healing light coming out of his hands. He's got the white and red robe. But to someone who's not that familiar and doesn't necessarily know that Jesus is often depicted in a white and red robe, it's possible that their mind wouldn't immediately go to Jesus. It might go to an ambiguous healer, maybe a saint. I wouldn't say a doctor, but it's possible that for some people, they wouldn't immediately go to Jesus. So if we take all of this together, the history that exists around this topic, the behaviors in this answer compared to the other answer, what can we conclude with a certain amount of confidence? Well, I must admit that maybe for the first time on the channel, there's a bit of a clash between what common sense and logic and my gut is telling me versus what the behaviors indicate. Let me explain. Logically, critically, I don't think it's very possible for somebody to look at this picture and say, this is a doctor. I think it's even less possible to see a headline that says, Donald Trump posts picture of himself as Jesus, and to go back to it and go, the fake news is crazy. What do you mean Jesus? Where's the Jesus in this? There's also the fact that the behaviors aren't perfect. There's a bit of that lower tonality, that bit of a downwards gaze, stumbling on his words a little. Is it the biggest cluster of stress I've seen? No. We've even seen a lot more clusters of stress specifically from Donald Trump. If you go back and look at other analyses, there are moments where he really falls apart when something stresses him out. This isn't that, but it's also not the epitome of comfort either. On the other hand, and these things can't really be ignored, this is the first time that I know of, so it's the only time or one of very few times that he took down a post that he said that he himself posted. Usually, if it comes down, it's somebody else posted it or he stands by it. This time, he said he thought this and then he took it down. That has never happened to my knowledge, or rarely. Second, although he fumbles on his words a little bit and we are seeing signs of increased cognitive load, like that looking down a lot, maybe associated a little bit with embarrassment, when he says that he thought it was a doctor and he was like looking at the fake news thinking like, how did they come up with this one? There's a good amount of certainty there. Like he's not fumbling on that. He's not like, I kind of thought it was, like he's like very clear saying, I thought it was a doctor. It wasn't Jesus. And he's really adamant about having thought that the media was completely making this up about it being Jesus. There's also this really, really big important thing, which is if this is a lie, it's a really bad one. Because this is a person who makes extremely important decisions for a country, looks over important documents. Attention to detail is very important. For him to say that he looked at this picture where there's no stethoscope, there's no lab coat, there's nothing that suggests it's a doctor, and he thought it was a doctor, it's not a very good look. If he was going to completely make up some kind of justification for the mistake, I think him or someone around him would come up with a much better one, right? They would say something along the lines of, well, when I first saw it, I thought that I was just a saint or a healer, not specifically Jesus. Because that would be a little bit more like, okay, I guess, maybe it's possible. I don't know. Just for him to say, I thought I was a doctor, makes people go, what are you talking about? That's not a doctor, and you're not a doctor. Alternatively, he would have used the exact same scapegoat that he's used in the past. To say that an intern or some social media employee posted that and he didn't. And then we would have the debate of whether or not he's being truthful, was it him, was it not him? But at least there'd be some kind of debate. In this case, he completely emphasized that he posted it. And then with a decent amount of certainty, he's saying that, no, it wasn't Jesus. It was me as a doctor, and only the fake news could come up with something like that. And he's sticking to that idea that he posted it. So with a decent amount of confidence, as I put all this together, here's where I'm landing on this. I think that when he first saw it, without giving it much thought, availability heuristic kicked in. The things that are most available to him. So for people who are very religious, the Bible is at the forefront of their mind and they will immediately see the Jesus element. But to him, I think as he quickly looked at it, he saw the big American flag. He saw him there surrounded by this light and people looking up to him, a nurse, a sick person, somebody praying up to him. And he saw himself as this big hero, this healer. I think he definitely saw the resemblances with Jesus there, but because it wasn't at the forefront of his thoughts, he focused on the Savior of America vibe of this picture and he posted it. I'm not buying the thing about the fake news. I think that when he heard about the Jesus thing, he went back to it, he saw it and was like, oh God, yeah, that is Jesus. And he took it down. And by the time this interview rolled around and he was asked about it, I think to a certain degree, he had convinced himself that when he first saw it, he didn't see the problem with it. Because that's a really dangerous place to be, right? If he admits that he first immediately saw the Jesus thing, how is he going to defend that? That he posted a picture of himself as Jesus. So I think in sort of a way to justify this to himself, he convinced himself that, no, when he first saw it, he thought for sure it was a doctor, it was a healer. That may have been some of it, but I have a hard time believing that he didn't see the Jesus resemblance at all. I just think he didn't focus on it or didn't see the problem with it. The exact same way that on Easter Sunday this year, he wrote a post with the F word in it, and a lot of Christians said that that's very inappropriate, but for him, it didn't dawn on him because he doesn't think that way. When you're very religious, to the point where it's a very big part of your identity, you filter all thoughts and experiences through your faith. But for somebody who pronounces it to Corinthians, it's just not at the forefront of his thoughts. But let me know in the comments what you think, because it is quite nuanced here. You can look at the stumbling of the words, that downwards gaze a little bit and say, I don't know, there's something here about this whole doctor thing that I'm not really buying. Alternatively, you can look at it and go, yeah, look, this is the first time where he takes accountability and says, I posted it. I thought I was a doctor. Consider the fact that there would have been easier and more believable ways out of this, which he's used in the past. Consider the fact that we've seen his behaviors fall apart way worse than this when he was trying to, kind of steer away from something. And the fact that he actually took it down instead of doubling down and committing to it, which historically is something that he does a lot more often. And so you could focus on all that and say, yeah, it kind of seems like he has convinced himself that he thought it was a picture of a doctor, even if that doesn't make any sense to us whatsoever. So let me know in the comments where you fall. Is it one, the other, somewhere in the middle? And let's try to keep it respectful because, again, this is very nuanced and we could see different things or focus on different parts of the behaviors. Let me know in the comments what you think and I will see you on the next one.